Picture this. You're 8 months pregnant, glowing with excitement about your first baby, when an elegant cream-colored envelope arrives at your door. Your heart skips as you recognize the expensive paper your billionaire husband always uses for important occasions. But as you open it, your world shatters completely. It's a wedding invitation, your husband's wedding invitation, to marry another woman tomorrow. But here's what makes this story absolutely explosive. The bride-to-be has no idea that the woman she's about to destroy is the daughter of the county sheriff, a man who spent 30 years hunting down criminals and has never, ever let anyone hurt his family. What happens when a pregnant woman discovers her entire life is a lie? When a billionaire's perfect con meets a sheriff's perfect justice? When a wedding becomes a crime scene and a church becomes a courtroom? This is the story of Rebecca Matthews Sterling, a woman who thought she knew what betrayal looked like, until she learned that sometimes the person sleeping next to you is your worst enemy. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Stay with me for the next 90 minutes, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about trust, justice, and the incredible strength that lives inside every woman who refuses to stay silent. This is billionaire stripped pregnant wife at his wedding to mistress wife's father was the sheriff. And I promise you, the ending will leave you breathless. The wedding invitation arrived on cream-colored paper, embossed, expensive. Everything Jonathan Sterling did was expensive. Rebecca Matthews Sterling stood in the doorway of her art gallery, 8 months pregnant, staring at the elegant script. Her name wasn't on it. Another woman's was, Vanessa Price. The baby kicked hard against her ribs. Rebecca pressed her free hand to her belly, steadying herself against the doorframe. The afternoon sun streaming through the gallery windows suddenly felt too bright, too hot. Mr. Jonathan Sterling requests the honor of your presence at his wedding to Miss Vanessa Price, she read aloud. Her voice cracked on the last word. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Tomorrow. She read it again. Then again. The words didn't change. The elegant letterpress didn't magically rearrange itself into something that made sense. Her wedding ring caught the light as her hand trembled. The same ring Jonathan had placed on her finger 4 years ago. The same ring she wore every day. Even when he started coming home later and later. Even when his business trips multiplied. Even when he stopped kissing her goodbye in the mornings. Rebecca sank into the gallery's vintage velvet chair, the one she'd bought at an estate sale in Charleston. The one Jonathan had called dusty junk, but she loved anyway. Her ankles were swollen. Everything was swollen these days, including her heart. Apparently, with the weight of this impossible thing in her hands, she pulled out her phone, dialed his office number from memory. Sterling Enterprises, this is Jennifer speaking. Jennifer, it's Rebecca. I need to speak with my husband. A pause. Too long. Rebecca's stomach clenched. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling. Mr. Sterling is unavailable. Unavailable? Rebecca's voice rose. It's his wife calling. Another pause. Shorter this time, but loaded with something Rebecca couldn't name. Would you like to leave a message? The line went dead before Rebecca could respond. She stared at her phone screen, watching Jonathan's contact photo fade to black. Him in his navy suit at their wedding reception, laughing at something she'd whispered in his ear. When had she last seen him laugh like that? When had she last seen him at all? Rebecca pushed herself up from the chair. Her back ached constantly now. The doctor said it was normal. Everything was normal. According to Dr. Harper, blood pressure fine, baby growing perfectly, husband completely absent. That last part, Dr. Harper hadn't mentioned. The gallery felt smaller suddenly. The walls pressed in as Rebecca walked between the paintings she'd curated so carefully. Local artists, mostly. People who poured their hearts onto canvas because they had no choice, because the art demanded to exist. She paused in front of a painting titled Fracture. A woman's face split down the middle, one half serene and smiling, the other half screaming. Rebecca touched her belly again, spoke to the baby in a whisper. Your daddy's getting married tomorrow, sweetheart, to someone who isn't your mama. The words hung in the gallery air like incense, sacred and terrible. She locked up the gallery early, drove home through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. past the coffee shop where she and Jonathan used to meet for Saturday morning lattes, past the park where they'd walked Buster, their golden retriever, before Buster got old and died, and they never got another dog because Jonathan said dogs were too much responsibility. The house sat on 3 acres outside town, Jonathan's dream house. He'd called it, all glass and steel and angles that cut the sky into geometric pieces. Rebecca had wanted something warmer, something with character. But Jonathan got what Jonathan wanted. He always did. The garage door opened at her remote's touch. Jonathan's space was empty. Had been empty for weeks, she realized. When was the last time his car had been there when she came home inside? The house echoed with her footsteps. Marble floors that showed every speck of dust. Minimalist furniture that looked like museum pieces. Nothing soft except the nursery upstairs, which Rebecca had decorated herself while Jonathan worked late, or traveled, or did whatever Jonathan did these days. She climbed the stairs slowly. Her back protested each step. In Jonathan's study, she flipped on the lights. His massive mahogany desk sat centered under a wall of windows. The desk where he worked late into the night, phone calls and hushed voices that stopped when she walked by. The desk where, she now realized, he might have been planning this. Rebecca opened the top drawer, pens, business cards, a checkbook for an account she didn't recognize. She opened the second drawer, files, contracts, legal documents that made her eyes blur with their tiny print. The third drawer stuck. She pulled harder. It gave way suddenly, sending papers scattering across the floor. Divorce papers. Rebecca stared at them from above, her pregnant belly blocking her view of her own feet. The papers looked official, legal, final. She knelt carefully, gathering the documents. Her name was typed neatly at the top. Rebecca Matthews Sterling, respondent. Below that, Jonathan Thomas Sterling, petitioner. Filed 3 months ago. Finalized 2 weeks ago. Without her signature, without her knowledge, without her presence in any courtroom anywhere. Rebecca sat on the floor of Jonathan's study, 8 months pregnant, holding proof that she was no longer married. According to these papers, she'd never contested the divorce, never asked for alimony or property division, had simply agreed to walk away with nothing, except she'd never seen these papers before in her life. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing her mother's distress. Rebecca rubbed the spot where tiny feet pushed against her ribs. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "Mama's going to figure this out." But she had no idea how. On Jonathan's desk, a note in his handwriting was tucked under a paperweight. Rebecca reached for it, her hand shaking. "You'll understand everything tomorrow. Tomorrow, the wedding." Rebecca's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Enjoy the show. VV for Vanessa." Rebecca stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then she stared at her own reflection in the black screen. Exhausted, confused, betrayed, but not broken, not yet. She needed help. She needed someone who would believe this impossible thing, someone who would know what to do. She scrolled through her contacts and found the number she'd been calling since she was old enough to dial a phone. "Dad, Becca, what's wrong?" Sheriff Thomas Matthews had always been able to hear trouble in his daughter's voice, even when she tried to hide it. "Dad, I need you to come over. Right now." And Dad, "Yes, sweetheart, bring your badge." Sheriff Thomas Matthews arrived in his patrol car 23 minutes later. Rebecca heard the gravel crunch under his tires from where she sat in the kitchen. The divorce papers spread across the granite island like evidence at a crime scene. The kitchen door opened without a knock. It never occurred to her father to wait for permission to enter, not when his daughter needed him. "Becca, in here, Dad." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, still wearing his uniform from what should have been the end of his shift. At 58, Sheriff Matthews carried himself like a man who'd spent 30 years keeping the peace in a county where peace didn't always come easy. His eyes went immediately to the papers on the counter, then to Rebecca's face, then to her belly, where his future grandchild was making its presence known with rhythmic kicks. "Tell me," he said simply. Rebecca handed him the wedding invitation first, watched his jaw tighten as he read. "Jonathan's marrying someone else tomorrow," she said. "Someone named Vanessa Price." Her father's eyes didn't change. He set the invitation down and picked up the divorce papers. These are dated 3 months ago. I've never seen them before tonight. You didn't sign these. It wasn't a question. Sheriff Matthews knew his daughter's signature, had taught her to write it clearly and confidently when she was 7 years old, practicing on the backs of his incident reports. Dad, I think I'm losing my mind. How can he be getting married if we're still married? How can we be divorced if I never got divorced? Sheriff Matthews pulled out his reading glasses, the same wire-rimmed ones he'd worn for as long as Rebecca could remember. He read through the papers slowly, professionally, not as her father, but as a law enforcement officer who'd seen enough fraud to recognize it at first glance. These papers say you were served with divorce documents on, he flipped pages, March 15th, at your art gallery. I was never served anything. Says here you had 30 days to respond. When you didn't respond, the court granted a default judgment. Rebecca felt the room tilt slightly. She gripped the edge of the granite countertop. But I would have responded. If someone had actually served me papers, I would have called you. I would have gotten a lawyer. I would have fought. I know you would have. Her father's voice was quiet, controlled. The voice he used when he was very, very angry but trying not to show it. How is this possible? Dad? Sheriff Matthews removed his glasses and looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. 8 months pregnant, exhausted, confused, sitting in a house that had never felt like home to him, married to a man he'd never quite trusted. It's possible because someone committed fraud, multiple felonies. Actually, the words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Felonies? Forging court documents? Filing false papers? If you were never properly served, this whole divorce is invalid. He gestured at the papers, which means tomorrow's wedding would be bigamy. Bigamy. The word hung in the air between them. Rebecca touched her belly absently, a habit she'd developed over the past months, seeking comfort from the tiny life inside her when the world outside felt uncertain. Dad, what do I do? Sheriff Matthews was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca could see him thinking, could almost watch the gears turning behind his eyes. This was how he'd always been, methodical, careful, never rushing to judgment, but never backing down from the truth once he found it. First, we need coffee. Decaf for you. Dad, I don't want coffee. I want answers. The coffee's for me, sweetheart. I'm going to be up all night. He moved around her kitchen like he belonged there. Found the coffee maker, the filters, the decaf she kept for when her mother visited. Rebecca watched him work, finding strange comfort in his familiar movements. You said to bring my badge. Why? Rebecca showed him the text from Vanessa. Enjoy the show. Sheriff Matthews read it twice. She wanted you to find all this tonight. The papers, the invitation. This isn't happening by accident. What do you mean? I mean someone's playing games. And in my experience, people who play games like this usually have something bigger planned. The coffee maker gurgled to life. Sheriff Matthews leaned against the counter, studying his daughter's face. When's the last time you actually saw Jonathan? Rebecca had to think. The days blurred together when you were 8 months pregnant and your husband was a ghost in his own house. Tuesday? No, Monday. He was getting dressed for work. I was still in bed. Did you talk? He asked if we needed milk. Such a normal question. Such a normal moment. How could she have known it might be the last conversation she'd ever have with her husband? Becca, I need you to think. Over the past few months, has anything seemed off? Besides him working late. I mean, phone calls at odd hours, money missing mail that didn't make sense. Rebecca considered this. The house had always felt empty, but she'd attributed that to Jonathan's work schedule. The phone calls had been constant, but that wasn't unusual for a man who owned 3 companies. But there were things, small things that hadn't seemed important at the time. The credit card bills stopped coming to the house about 2 months ago. Jonathan said he'd switched to electronic statements to save paper, more environmentally friendly. What else? He had me sign some papers last month, said they were updates to our insurance policies because of the baby. I signed them without reading them. She felt foolish admitting this. I trusted him. Sheriff Matthews poured coffee into 2 mugs, added cream to hers without asking how she wanted it. He'd been making her coffee since she was 16 and thought she was grown up enough to drink it. Those papers you signed, any idea what they really were? God, Dad, they could have been anything. Power of attorney, property transfers. I just signed whatever he put in front of me. This was the worst part. Not just that Jonathan had betrayed her, but that she'd made it so easy for him to do it. Rebecca straightened the salt and pepper shakers on the kitchen island. Once, twice, 3 times, until they were perfectly aligned with the edge of the granite. Her father noticed. He'd always noticed her nervous habits. You used to do that when you were little. Line up your toys when you were worried about something. I remember. You want to know what I think? Rebecca nodded. I think this whole thing was planned from the beginning. The divorce papers, the wedding, even that text message tonight. Someone wanted you to find out exactly like this. Exactly when you did. But why? Sheriff Matthews sipped his coffee. That's what we're going to find out. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Who are you calling? Miranda Walsh. Remember her? You went to college together. She's a family law attorney now. Dad, it's almost 10 o'clock at night. Miranda's used to late-night calls from law enforcement. Goes with the territory in domestic cases. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Tom, is everything okay? Miranda, it's about Becca. I need you to meet us tonight. We've got a situation that can't wait until morning. A pause, then. I'll be right over. After he hung up, Sheriff Matthews looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. Becca, I want you to know something. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we find out, you're not alone in this. You understand me? I understand. And sweetheart, yeah, Dad, nobody humiliates my daughter. Nobody. The way he said it made Rebecca believe, for the first time since opening that invitation, that maybe everything would be okay. Maybe she wasn't as powerless as she felt. Maybe tomorrow wouldn't be the end of her story. Maybe it would be the beginning of something else entirely. Outside, headlights swept across the kitchen windows. Miranda Walsh's car crunched up the gravel driveway. Ready to fight back? Sheriff Matthews asked. Rebecca touched her belly one more time. Then she nodded. Ready? Miranda Walsh hadn't changed much since college. Still sharp-eyed, still dressed like she meant business even at 10:30 at night. She hugged Rebecca carefully, accommodating the pregnant belly between them. Jesus, Becca. Tom filled me in on the drive over. This is insane. They sat around Rebecca's kitchen table, the divorce papers and wedding invitations spread between them, like playing cards in a high-stakes game. Miranda examined each document with a lawyer's methodical attention to detail. These are sophisticated forgeries, she said finally. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. But they are forgeries, Rebecca asked. Oh, absolutely. The court seal's wrong. Judge Patterson retired 6 months before the date on these papers. And most importantly, Miranda looked up, there's no record of any divorce filing in your name. I checked the county database on my way over. Relief flooded through Rebecca so fast it made her dizzy. She was still married, still had legal rights, still had a claim to the life she'd built with Jonathan, even if he'd decided to abandon it. So the wedding tomorrow is definitely bigamy, Sheriff Matthews said. If it happens, yes, which means we can stop it. Miranda's smile was sharp, professional. But first, we need to understand what we're really dealing with here. She opened her laptop and turned it toward them. I did some digging into Vanessa Price on the way over. Interesting woman? A social media profile filled the screen. Vanessa in designer dresses at charity galas. Vanessa on tropical vacations. Vanessa in what looked like the penthouse apartment downtown that Rebecca had helped Jonathan choose for business meetings. She's been Jonathan's assistant for 2 years, Miranda continued. But look at this timeline. She scrolled through photos, pointing out dates. Here she is at a company Christmas party 18 months ago. Here she is in Cabo last spring. And here, she clicked on a photo dated 6 months ago. She is very obviously pregnant. Rebecca stared at the image. Vanessa in a flowing dress that couldn't quite hide the curve of her belly. She was pregnant 6 months ago. Gets more interesting. Look at this. Miranda pulled up a birth certificate from the public records database. Baby boy, born 4 months ago. Father listed as Jonathan Thomas Sterling. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Rebecca felt like she was falling down a very deep hole. He has a son, 4 months old, Miranda confirmed, which means Vanessa was pregnant with his child while you were getting pregnant with his child. Sheriff Matthews stood up abruptly, paced to the window. Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Dad, I'm okay, sweetheart. Just processing. But Rebecca could tell he wasn't okay. None of them were okay. This was bigger than adultery, bigger than divorce fraud. This was a systematic destruction of her entire life. There's more, Miranda said quietly. Rebecca wasn't sure she could handle more, but she nodded. Property records show Jonathan's been transferring assets for the past year. The gallery building you lease. He sold it 3 months ago to a company owned by Vanessa Price. The floor seemed to shift under Rebecca's feet. My gallery. The lease expires next month. The new owner can choose not to renew. Rebecca thought about her artists, the local painters and sculptors who depended on her gallery to showcase their work, the community she'd built over 4 years of careful cultivation. What about the house? Miranda's expression told her everything she needed to know before she spoke. He put it up for sale last week. Closing is set for next Friday. Rebecca stood up too quickly. The room spun. Sheriff Matthews caught her arm, steadied her. Sit down, sweetheart. I can't sit down. He's taking everything. The house, the gallery, our bank accounts. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to live when the baby comes? Hey! Her father's voice was firm, commanding. The voice that had talked her through scraped knees and high school heartbreak and every crisis of her 30 years. Look at me. Rebecca met his eyes. We're not going to let that happen. Do you hear me? We're going to fix this. But how he's had months to plan this? He's moved all the money, sold everything, made sure I can't fight back. I don't even have access to our joint accounts anymore. Miranda was typing rapidly on her laptop. Actually, you might have more power than you think. If the divorce isn't legal, then all these property transfers are invalid. A married person can't sell joint marital assets without their spouse's consent. What does that mean? It means we can file injunctions, stop the house sale, freeze the accounts, challenge every transaction he's made. Hope flickered in Rebecca's chest, small and fragile, but real. Tomorrow's Saturday, Sheriff Matthews said. Courts are closed. Emergency filings don't wait for business hours. Miranda was already drafting documents on her screen. I can have injunctions filed within 2 hours, but we need to do this tonight. Rebecca sank back into her chair. The baby was quiet now, as if sensing the gravity of what the adults were discussing. She put her hand on her belly and tried to think clearly. What about tomorrow, the wedding? That's up to you, Miranda said. We could try to stop it through legal channels, get a court order, but that's not guaranteed to work, and it might tip our hand too early. What's the other option? Sheriff Matthews and Miranda exchanged a look. We let it happen, her father said slowly. Let him commit bigamy in front of 200 witnesses. Then we arrest him. The idea was so audacious it took Rebecca's breath away. Arrest him at his own wedding. It's a felony. Becca, bigamy carries serious jail time, and if he's committed fraud with the divorce papers, that's additional charges. Rebecca tried to imagine it. Walking into that wedding, facing Jonathan and Vanessa and all their guests, watching them exchange vows that were meaningless because he was already married to her, then watching her father put him in handcuffs. I can't do that. I can't crash a wedding 8 months pregnant and humiliate myself in front of half the town. You wouldn't be humiliating yourself, Miranda said gently. You'd be standing up for your rights. And more importantly, you'd be protecting other women from falling for the same Other women? Men like Jonathan don't usually limit themselves to 2 victims. If he's done this to you, he's probably done it to others. Will do it to others if he's not stopped? Rebecca thought about that. About other women sitting in their kitchens, pregnant and confused, holding wedding invitations to ceremonies they weren't invited to. She looked around the kitchen, at the house that was about to be sold out from under her, at the life that had been systematically dismantled while she trusted in signed papers and asked about milk. What if I go to the wedding but don't say anything? What if I just watch? That's an option, Sheriff Matthews said. Let him go through with the ceremony. Then we make our move. Would that work legally? Miranda nodded. Actually, it might work better. Once the ceremony is complete, the bigamy is unambiguous. No room for him to claim it was all a misunderstanding. Rebecca stood up again, more carefully this time. Walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the dark yard. At the garden she'd planted last spring, where tomatoes and herbs were growing in neat rows she'd never harvest. Behind her, her father and her friend waited for her decision. Tomorrow, Jonathan Sterling was going to marry another woman in a ceremony that would be beautiful and illegal and witnessed by everyone who mattered in their social circle. Tomorrow, Rebecca could hide at home and let it happen. Could start over somewhere else with nothing but her baby and her wounded pride. Or tomorrow, she could show up and watch her husband commit a felony, then watch her father arrest him for it. She turned back to face them. If we do this, if we let the wedding happen and then arrest him, what are the chances we get everything back? The house? The gallery? The accounts? High, Miranda said immediately. Fraudulent conveyances made to hide assets during marriage can be reversed, especially if criminal intent is proven. And Jonathan, what happens to him? Bigamy's a Class D felony, 2 to 12 years. Fraud charges could add more time. 12 years. Their baby would be 12 years old when Jonathan got out of prison. Rebecca touched her belly again, felt the tiny kicks that reminded her this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the child who deserved better than a father who would abandon them before they were even born. Okay, she said quietly. We do it. Sheriff Matthews stepped closer. You're sure? I'm sure. But I have one condition. What's that? When you arrest him, I want to be the one who says, I object. For the first time since receiving that invitation, Rebecca Matthews Sterling smiled. Sheriff Matthews didn't sleep that night. Rebecca could hear him moving around downstairs, making phone calls in the quiet voice he used for official business. By the time she came down for breakfast, still in her robe at 8 in the morning, he had coffee made and files spread across her kitchen table. Morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep? Terribly. You didn't. He looked tired but alert. The way he looked during big cases that required his full attention. Rebecca realized this had become a case for him. Not just a father protecting his daughter, but a sheriff investigating criminal activity in his jurisdiction. What's all this? She gestured at the papers covering the table. Legal documents, financial records, printouts that looked official and complicated. Miranda worked all night, filed emergency injunctions at 6 this morning. As of 30 minutes ago, all joint assets are frozen. The house sale is suspended. Your gallery lease is protected under tenant rights law. Rebecca poured herself orange juice and sat down across from him. So we stopped him. We stopped the financial bleeding. But Becca, what I found last night goes way beyond what he's done to you. Sheriff Matthews handed her a file folder. Inside were bank records, property transfers, incorporation documents. Your husband has been running a sophisticated investment fraud for at least 2 years, maybe longer. Investment fraud. He's been taking money from investors for development projects that don't exist, using new investor money to pay returns to old investors. Classic Ponzi scheme. Rebecca felt nauseous, and not from pregnancy hormones. How much money? Conservatively, $15 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. $15 million. More money than Rebecca had ever seen or thought about or imagined being responsible for. Dad, are you saying Jonathan is some kind of criminal mastermind? I'm saying your husband is a con artist who got too greedy and too sloppy. The wedding tomorrow isn't just about marrying his mistress. It's about having a clean exit strategy when the whole scheme collapses. Sheriff Matthews pulled out another document, a flight itinerary. Honeymoon in the Cayman Islands. One-way tickets. Departure Monday morning. One way. No return flight booked. And guess what's in the Cayman Islands? Rebecca didn't want to guess. She was tired of guessing, tired of discoveries that made everything worse. Banking secrecy laws, no extradition treaty with the United States for financial crimes. If Jonathan gets on that plane Monday morning, we'll never see him again. The kitchen fell quiet. Rebecca could hear birds outside the window. Normal Saturday morning sounds that felt surreal given the conversation they were having. So the wedding isn't just bigamy? It's his escape plan. Exactly. Marry Vanessa, legitimize their relationship in the eyes of the law, disappear with $15 million and their son. What about our baby? Sheriff Matthews reached across the table and took her hand. I don't think he ever planned to be around for our baby. The truth of that hit Rebecca harder than all the financial documents and legal injunctions. Jonathan had gotten her pregnant and then systematically erased her from his life. Their child would be born into a world where their father was either in prison or fled to a Caribbean island with his real family. Becca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Okay. Did you ever suspect any of it? The money, the other woman, the fraudulent business deals? Rebecca considered the question seriously. Had there been signs, red flags she'd ignored or explained away? He traveled a lot, but his business required travel. He worked late, but successful people work late. He had phone calls at odd hours. But when you're dealing with international clients, timing is complicated. She paused, remembering. There were things that didn't make sense. Money that appeared and disappeared. Expensive gifts, he said, were business write-offs. That penthouse apartment, he claimed, was for client meetings. But you didn't question it. I trusted him. When you love someone, when you're building a life with someone, you want to believe they're telling you the truth. Sheriff Matthews squeezed her hand. That's not your fault. Con artists are good at what they do. They make their victims complicit in their own deception. I feel so stupid. You're not stupid. You're trusting. There's a difference. Rebecca's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Thinking of you today. Hope you're feeling well. V. She showed it to her father. She's taunting you. Why? What does she get out of making sure I know what's happening? Sheriff Matthews was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca could see him thinking through possibilities, weighing motivations like evidence. Vanessa's not just the mistress. Becca, she's his business partner. The fraud scheme requires two people to work properly. Someone to bring in investors, someone to manage the fake paperwork. My guess is she's been handling the administrative side while Jonathan played the charming entrepreneur. So they're both criminals. Probably, which means she has as much to lose as he does if this all falls apart. Then why is she texting me? Why risk drawing attention to herself? Because she wants you at that wedding? She wants you to see it happen. Rebecca didn't understand. Why would she want that? Think about it. You're the only person who can prove the marriage is invalid. You're the only witness to the fraud. If something happened to you, if you were discredited or disappeared or had some kind of accident, their plan works perfectly. The implication hung in the air between them. Rebecca touched her belly protectively. You think they want to hurt me? I think they want to neutralize you as a threat, and there are lots of ways to do that without physical violence. Destroying your credibility, making you look like a jealous ex-wife who's lost her mind, getting you committed to psychiatric care, having you arrested for harassment or trespassing. Sheriff Matthews stood up, began pacing again. That's why she's texting you, creating a paper trail that shows you're unstable, obsessed, potentially dangerous. But I haven't done anything yet. But if you show up at that wedding, if you object to the ceremony, if you cause a scene, those text messages become evidence of your mental state, proof that you were stalking them, harassing them, disrupting their happiness because you couldn't accept that your marriage was over. Rebecca felt the walls of the trap closing around her. Every option seemed designed to destroy her credibility or her safety or both. So we don't go to the wedding, we let it happen and arrest them afterward. That could work, except for one problem. What? Their flight leaves Monday morning. If we wait until after the wedding to build our case, we might not have enough time to stop them from disappearing. Rebecca rubbed her temples. The headache that had been building all morning was getting worse. Dad, what if we can't stop them? What if they get away with all of it? Sheriff Matthews stopped pacing, looked at his daughter directly. They're not getting away with anything. I've been sheriff of this county for 15 years. I've seen con artists before. I've seen men who think they're smarter than the law. His voice was steady, calm, absolutely certain. They all make the same mistake. They underestimate the people they hurt. They think victims will stay quiet, stay ashamed, stay powerless. He sat back down at the table. But you're not powerless. Becca, you're the daughter of a sheriff. You have legal rights and family support, and a community that cares about you. Most importantly, you have something they don't have. What's that? The truth. Rebecca looked at her father, at this man who had spent 30 years protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, who had taught her to stand up straight and speak clearly and never be afraid of bullies. So what do we do? Sheriff Matthews smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since this all began. We go to that wedding, we watch them commit felony bigamy in front of 200 witnesses, and then we arrest them both. Both. If Vanessa's his business partner, she's equally guilty. Fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. She'll face the same charges he does. What about their baby, their 4-month-old son? Sheriff Matthews' expression softened. Child Services will place him with relatives while his parents are in custody. It's not ideal, but it's better than growing up with parents who are career criminals. Rebecca thought about that, about Jonathan's son, who would grow up knowing his father was in prison for crimes that destroyed other families. Then she thought about her own baby, about the life she wanted to build for this child, a life based on honesty and integrity and the knowledge that actions have consequences. Okay, she said, we go to the wedding. You're sure? I'm sure. But Dad, yeah, sweetheart, when this is all over, when they're both in custody and the money's been recovered and justice is served, I want to do something. What's that? I want to help the other victims. The people who invested their money and trusted Jonathan and Vanessa. I want to make sure they know they're not alone. Sheriff Matthews reached across the table and hugged his daughter, carefully, mindfully of her pregnant belly, but firmly. That's my girl, he said. That's exactly what we're going to do. Rebecca woke up at 5:30 in the morning with contractions. Not real labor. Dr. Harper had warned her about this. Braxton Hicks contractions. Practice runs her body was doing to prepare for the real thing. But they were strong enough to wake her, strong enough to make her grab her belly and breathe through them like she'd learned in birthing class. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, breathe out for 6. Repeat until the tightness passed. She used the same technique now, sitting on the edge of her bed, preparing for the day ahead. Today she would watch her husband marry another woman. Today she would confront the man who had systematically destroyed her life while she slept beside him, trusting and unaware. Today she would discover whether she was strong enough to fight back. Downstairs, Sheriff Matthews was already dressed in his uniform, full duty gear, including the service weapon Rebecca rarely thought about, but which seemed suddenly heavily present on his hip. Morning, sweetheart. Contractions. Just practice ones. How did you know? Your mother had them for weeks before you were born. Used to wake me up at all hours, breathing like she was running a marathon. He poured coffee into a travel mug. You ready for this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's courage right there. Rebecca made herself breakfast she didn't want. Toast that tasted like cardboard. Orange juice that sat in her stomach like acid. But the baby needed nutrition, and she needed strength. So she ate methodically while her father made phone calls to his deputies. Ryan's going to meet us at the church. He'll be in plain clothes, sitting in the back. Miranda will be there too, in case we need immediate legal backup. What about the arrests? How does that work exactly? Sheriff Matthews sat down across from her, his coffee steaming between his hands. We wait until the ceremony is complete, until the officiant pronounces them married. At that point, bigamy has been committed in front of hundreds of witnesses. Then what? Then I identify myself as law enforcement and place both of them under arrest for bigamy and fraud. Ryan will assist if needed. Miranda will advise them of their rights to remain silent and request attorneys. It sounded so clinical when he laid it out like that, so professional and orderly. What if they resist? What if Jonathan tries to run? He won't run, not in front of all those people. His whole con is based on maintaining respectability. He's not going to destroy his image by fleeing from the police at his own wedding. Rebecca hoped her father was right, but she'd been wrong about Jonathan so many times already. Dad, what if I can't do it? What if I get there and I'm too scared or too emotional, or I just fall apart? Sheriff Matthews reached across the table and took her hand. Then you fall apart, and I'll handle the rest. But Becca, I don't think you're going to fall apart. You're stronger than you know. How can you be so sure? Because you're still here, after everything he's done to you, after all the lies and betrayal and fraud. You're still standing. You're still fighting. That tells me everything I need to know about how strong you are. Rebecca squeezed his hand, drew strength from the calluses on his palms, earned through 30 years of hard work and service to their community. What should I wear? The question seemed absurd given everything else they were planning, but Rebecca couldn't show up to Jonathan's wedding in maternity sweatpants and a t-shirt, not if she wanted to maintain any dignity during what was sure to be the most humiliating experience of her life. Wear something that makes you feel powerful, Sheriff Matthews said. Something that reminds you who you are. Rebecca thought about her wardrobe. Most of her nice clothes didn't fit anymore. But there was one dress, navy blue with a wrap style that accommodated her pregnant figure. She'd worn it to gallery openings when she needed to look professional and confident. I know what to wear. Good. We need to leave here by 1:15. Church is 20 minutes away, and I want to be there early to coordinate with Ryan. Rebecca nodded. Then a thought occurred to her. Dad, do you think Jonathan knows we're coming? Probably not. Why? Vanessa's been texting me. What if she told him? What if this is all part of their plan somehow? Sheriff Matthews considered this. It's possible, but it doesn't change what we have to do. Whether they know we're coming or not, bigamy is still a felony. The evidence of fraud doesn't disappear just because they're expecting us. But they could be prepared. They could have lawyers there, or security, or an escape plan. Let them be prepared. We're prepared too. Rebecca finished her toast and went upstairs to get ready. In her bedroom, she stood in front of the full-length mirror and tried to imagine what she would look like walking into that church. 8 months pregnant, betrayed wife, woman scorned, or woman seeking justice. The dress fit perfectly. Navy blue was her color. Her mother had always said, brought out her eye, made her look professional and serious. She put on makeup carefully. Not too much, not too little. She wasn't trying to compete with Vanessa Price. She was trying to look like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. In her jewelry box, she found the pearl earrings her father had given her for high school graduation, the necklace that had been her grandmother's, pieces that connected her to the women in her family who had faced their own challenges with grace and determination. Finally, she looked at her wedding ring, the diamond solitaire that had once represented everything she wanted from life: love, commitment, partnership, forever. She almost took it off, almost left it on the dresser as a symbol of the marriage that was ending today. But then she realized she was still married. Legally, legitimately married. That ring was evidence of her status as Jonathan's wife, proof of her right to be at that church, to object to that ceremony, to demand justice. She left the ring on. Downstairs, Sheriff Matthews was waiting by the door. He looked at her and nodded approvingly. You look like someone who means business. I hope so. Ready. Rebecca took one last look around the house, at the kitchen where she'd discovered Jonathan's betrayal, at the living room where they'd talked about baby names and nursery colors and the future they would build together, at the life she was about to leave behind forever. Ready. They drove to the church in Sheriff Matthews' patrol car. Rebecca had suggested taking her own car, but her father insisted. Today, he wasn't just her dad. He was law enforcement, and this was official business. The church sat on a hill overlooking the river, its white steeple visible from miles away. St. Michael's Episcopal, where Rebecca and Jonathan had been married 4 years ago, where she'd thought she would bring their children for baptisms and Christmas services and all the ceremonies that marked a normal family life. The parking lot was already full. Luxury cars and SUVs that belonged to Jonathan's business associates and social circle. People who would witness his arrest and spend the next months gossiping about how they'd seen it coming all along. Rebecca's stomach churned. Not contractions this time, just pure anxiety mixed with determination. There's Ryan. Sheriff Matthews pointed to a man in a dark suit standing near the church entrance. Detective Ryan O'Connor looked like a wedding guest, but Rebecca could see the alert way he scanned the crowd, the subtle position that gave him a clear view of all exits. And there's Miranda. Miranda Walsh stood near a side door, also dressed for a wedding, also watching everything with professional attention. They're all here to support you. Becca, you're not alone. Rebecca nodded, touched her belly one more time. The baby was quiet, as if sensing this was important. "Let's do this," she said. Sheriff Matthews got out of the car and came around to open her door, helped her out with the careful attention he'd shown her since she was a little girl learning to climb trees. Together, they walked toward the church where Jonathan Sterling was about to commit felony bigamy in front of 200 witnesses. Rebecca held her head high and kept walking. The sanctuary was packed. Rebecca and her father slipped into a back pew just as the processional music began. Around them, guests whispered about how beautiful everything looked, how happy the couple seemed. What a perfect day it was for a wedding. If they only knew. Rebecca recognized most of the faces. Jonathan's business partners and their wives, country club friends, the social circle that had welcomed her 4 years ago when she married into their world. None of them looked at her with recognition. Why would they? As far as they knew, Rebecca Sterling no longer existed. She'd been erased from Jonathan's life so completely that her presence here would be inexplicable. Until it wasn't. The music swelled. The wedding party began their procession down the aisle. Groomsmen in expensive tuxedos, bridesmaids in champagne-colored silk that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly gallery rent. Then came Vanessa. Rebecca had seen her photos online, but seeing her in person was different. She was beautiful, obviously. Blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo, makeup applied by professionals, a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. But what struck Rebecca most was how young she looked. 27. But she could have passed for 22. There was something almost childlike about her smile as she walked toward the altar where Jonathan waited. Jonathan! Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. He looked exactly like he had on their wedding day. The same tuxedo, she realized, the same confident smile, the same way of standing that suggested he owned whatever room he was in. For a moment, the strangest emotion washed over her. Not anger or betrayal or hurt, nostalgia. This man had been her husband, the father of her unborn child. She had loved him completely and believed he loved her the same way. Seeing him now, she remembered why she'd fallen for him in the first place, which made what he'd done to her even worse. The ceremony began. Traditional Episcopal liturgy that Rebecca knew by heart from her own wedding. The same promises Jonathan had made to her 4 years ago. He was now making to someone else. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jonathan and Vanessa in holy matrimony. Rebecca's hands clenched in her lap. Beside her, Sheriff Matthews sat perfectly still, but she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. The irony was overwhelming. Jonathan was standing at an altar, in a church, speaking words about reverence and commitment while committing multiple felonies. If any person can show just cause why Jonathan and Vanessa may not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. This was the moment. Rebecca could stand up right now, could say the words that would stop this travesty before it became a crime, but she stayed seated. The plan was to let it happen, to let Jonathan complete the bigamy so there would be no question about his guilt. The silence stretched. The officiant waited the customary moment, then continued. Jonathan, will you have this woman to be your wife, to live together in holy matrimony? Will you love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, in sadness and in joy, to cherish and continually bestow upon her your heart's deepest devotion, forsaking all others? Keep yourself only unto her as long as you both shall live, forsaking all others. Jonathan looked directly at Vanessa, smiled with what appeared to be genuine affection, and said clearly, I will. He was a good actor. Rebecca had to give him that. Vanessa repeated the same vows with tears in her eyes that looked completely real. Maybe they were real. Maybe she actually believed she was marrying the man she loved, not participating in an elaborate con game. Or maybe she was an even better actor than Jonathan. The rings, please. A small boy who looked exactly like Jonathan carried the rings forward on a velvet pillow. Rebecca's heart clenched. Their son, 4 months old according to the birth certificate, but clearly older in person. Maybe 8 months. 9, the timeline was getting more complicated by the minute. Jonathan took Vanessa's ring and slipped it onto her finger. With this ring, I thee wed, with my body. I thee worship, With all my worldly goods, I thee endow. All his worldly goods. Goods that rightfully belonged to Rebecca and their unborn child. Goods that had been stolen from investors who trusted him. Goods that represented years of fraud and manipulation. Vanessa placed a ring on Jonathan's finger. The same words, the same promises, the same lies dressed up in sacred language. By the power vested in me by the state and by Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jonathan, you may kiss your bride. The moment their lips met, Sheriff Matthews stood up. Excuse me. His voice carried clearly through the sanctuary. Conversation stopped. All 200 heads turned to look at the back of the church where a uniformed sheriff's deputy was standing in the aisle. I need to speak with the bride and groom. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jonathan's face had gone pale, but his smile never wavered. Officer, I'm sure whatever this is about can wait until after our ceremony. Actually, sir, it can't. I'm Sheriff Thomas Matthews, and I'm placing you under arrest for bigamy and fraud. The sanctuary erupted. Gasps and shouts and the sound of 200 people trying to process what they just heard. Jonathan's smile finally disappeared. There must be some mistake. I'm not married to anyone else. Actually, you are. Rebecca stood up. Every eye in the church turned to her. 8 months pregnant in her navy blue dress, wedding ring glinting on her finger. You're married to me. The noise level increased. People were standing up, trying to get a better look, pulling out phones to record what was happening. Vanessa stared at Rebecca with an expression that was hard to read. Surprise, fear, something else. Becca. Jonathan's voice was barely audible over the crowd noise. What are you doing here? Watching my husband commit bigamy. Rebecca walked down the aisle slowly. Her back ached and her feet hurt, and she felt like she might throw up, but she kept walking, past the shocked faces of people who had known her as Jonathan's wife and then forgotten she existed. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheriff Matthews' voice cut through the chaos. I need everyone to remain calm and stay seated. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. Detective O'Connor had moved to block the exits. Miranda Walsh was making her way toward the altar with a briefcase full of legal documents. Rebecca reached the front of the church and looked directly at Jonathan. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Becca, I can explain. Explain what? How you filed fraudulent divorce papers, how you've been stealing money from investors, how you got another woman pregnant while I was carrying your child. The crowd was hanging on every word. This was better than any soap opera. Jonathan glanced around wildly, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. This is all a misunderstanding. Becca, you're obviously upset, but I'm not upset. Jonathan, I'm done. She turned to Sheriff Matthews and nodded. Jonathan Thomas Sterling, you are under arrest for bigamy in the first degree, fraud in the first degree, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As her father continued reading Miranda rights, Rebecca looked at Vanessa. You must be Vanessa Price. We should talk. Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. I don't have anything to say to you. Really, because I think you have a lot to say about the business you've been running with my husband, about the investors you've been defrauding, about the fact that you've been his partner in more than just romance. Sheriff Matthews moved toward Vanessa with handcuffs. Vanessa Price, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. Wait, Vanessa said quickly. I want to make a deal. Miranda Walsh stepped forward. Ms. Price, I would advise you to speak with an attorney before saying anything else. I don't need an attorney. I need a deal. I can tell you everything. About the money, the investors, the offshore accounts, everything. Jonathan spun around to stare at her. Vanessa, don't say another word. Why not you were going to disappear Monday morning and leave me holding the bag? Weren't you? Leave me to face the music while you started over somewhere else? The pieces were falling into place. Rebecca could see it in Vanessa's eyes. She wasn't just Jonathan's accomplice. She was another one of his victims. He told you this was all legal, didn't he? Rebecca said quietly. He told you his divorce was final, that you were his partner, not his employee. Tears started running down Vanessa's cheeks, ruining her professional makeup. He said we were building something together. that after we got married, we'd be equals. But you found out different. The flight to the Cayman Islands, one ticket, not two." Jonathan was silent now, his face a mask of resignation. Sheriff Matthews finished cuffing both of them. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he led them toward the church exit. Rebecca followed slowly, her hand on her belly where the baby was suddenly very active, as if sensing that everything had changed. At the back of the church, she paused and turned to address the crowd. "For those of you who invested money with Jonathan Sterling, please contact the district attorney's office. You'll want to file victim impact statements." Then she walked out of St. Michael's Episcopal Church, where she'd been married 4 years ago and divorced today. In the parking lot, Sheriff Matthews was loading Jonathan and Vanessa into separate patrol cars. "You okay, sweetheart?" Rebecca looked back at the church, where wedding guests were streaming out in confused clusters, already reaching for their phones to spread the news of what they'd witnessed. "I'm okay, Dad. I'm actually okay." And for the first time in months, she really was. The panic attack hit Rebecca 3 hours later. She was sitting in Sheriff Matthews' office, giving her official statement to Detective O'Connor, when suddenly she couldn't breathe. The room spun. Her vision tunneled. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure she was having a heart attack. "I can't breathe," she gasped. "Something's wrong. The baby, Becca, look at me." Her father's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You're having a panic attack. The baby's fine. You're fine." But she didn't feel fine. She felt like she was drowning in air that had turned to liquid, like the floor was tilting under her chair, like everything solid in her world had suddenly become unstable. "I need to go to the hospital. We're going. Right now." Detective O'Connor drove while Sheriff Matthews sat in the back with Rebecca, holding her hand and talking her through breathing exercises. "In through your nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through your mouth for 6. That's it. You're doing great." But Rebecca wasn't doing great. Now that the adrenaline from the wedding confrontation had worn off, the full weight of everything was crushing down on her. She was 8 months pregnant. Her husband was in jail. Her entire life had been revealed as an elaborate lie, and she was completely, utterly alone. At the hospital, Dr. Harper checked the baby's heartbeat and Rebecca's blood pressure. Everything was normal, physically normal. Anyway, panic attacks are common during pregnancy, she explained, especially after traumatic events. Your body is processing a lot of stress. "Is the baby okay?" "The baby is fine. Strong heartbeat, normal movement patterns. But I'm concerned about you." Dr. Harper sat down beside Rebecca's bed. "Tom told me what happened today. That must have been incredibly difficult. I thought I was handling it well. I felt strong during the confrontation, but afterward, reality set in. That's normal too." Rebecca started crying then. Not the angry tears she'd shed over Jonathan's betrayal, but deep, exhausted sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she'd been avoiding all day. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be a single mother. I don't know where I'm going to live, or how I'm going to pay for anything, or what I'm going to tell this baby about their father." Dr. Harper handed her tissues. "You don't have to figure it all out today." "But I do. The baby's coming in 4 weeks, maybe less. I need a plan. I need a home. I need—" She trailed off, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she needed. Sheriff Matthews appeared in the doorway. "How are we doing?" "Physically fine," Dr. Harper said. "Emotionally exhausted, which is understandable. Can I take her home?" "Yes, but she needs rest and support. This kind of stress isn't good for mother or baby." "Home," Rebecca almost laughed. She didn't have a home. The house Jonathan had put up for sale wouldn't feel like sanctuary anymore. Too many memories. Too many lies told in rooms that had once felt safe. In the car, she asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Dad, can I stay with you and Mom for a while?" "Sweetheart, you can stay with us as long as you need to. Forever, if that's what you want." The relief was overwhelming. She wouldn't be homeless. She wouldn't give birth in a motel room or a homeless shelter. She would have her childhood bedroom back, and her mother's cooking, and the sound of her father's voice reading the newspaper aloud at breakfast. She would be someone's daughter again, instead of someone's discarded wife. At her parents' house, Rebecca's mother Carol was waiting with soup and clean sheets, and the kind of maternal comfort that only comes from someone who has loved you since before you were born. "Oh, honey," she said, wrapping Rebecca in a hug that smelled like lavender and vanilla. "I'm so proud of you for being brave today." "I don't feel brave. I feel scared." "Brave people feel scared too. That's what makes them brave." That night, Rebecca lay in her old bedroom, surrounded by high school photos and college pennants and all the artifacts of a simpler time when she thought she knew what her future would look like. The baby was active, rolling and kicking like they were as unsettled as she was. Rebecca put both hands on her belly and tried to project calm she didn't feel. "It's going to be okay, little one. Mama's going to figure this out." But she wasn't sure she believed it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miranda Walsh. "Vanessa's been talking, gave us locations of offshore accounts, names of other victims, detailed records of the fraud scheme. She's cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence." Another text followed. "Jonathan's not talking. His lawyer is pushing for bail, but with the flight risk and the offshore accounts, I don't think he'll get it." Rebecca stared at the messages. Justice was happening. The legal system was working. Money would be recovered. Other victims would be compensated, and Jonathan would face consequences for his crimes. So why did she feel so empty? Maybe because justice didn't undo the damage, didn't erase the months of lies and manipulation, didn't restore her trust or her sense of safety or her belief that love was real and lasting. Justice was important, but it wasn't the same as healing. Rebecca got up and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet and familiar. The same view she'd had as a teenager, when her biggest worry was whether someone would ask her to prom. Now she was 30 years old, 8 months pregnant, and starting her life over from zero. She thought about calling Jonathan. He was allowed phone calls from jail. She could ask him why he'd done this to her, to their unborn child, to all the people who trusted him. But she already knew why. Because he could. Because he was selfish and greedy and didn't care who he hurt as long as he got what he wanted. The why didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came next, how she would rebuild, who she would become when she was no longer Jonathan Sterling's wife. Rebecca touched her belly again. The baby had quieted, settling into sleep patterns that would soon become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "Different than I planned, but okay." For the first time since opening that wedding invitation, Rebecca Matthews Sterling fell asleep without crying. It felt like the beginning of something new. 2 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, Rebecca woke up in her childhood bedroom to the sound of her mother making breakfast downstairs. Pancakes, from the smell of it. Her mother only made pancakes when someone needed comforting. Rebecca's back ached. Her feet were so swollen she could barely get her shoes on. The baby seemed to have run out of room and was making its displeasure known by kicking her ribs every few minutes. But for the first time in months, she felt peaceful. Downstairs, Sheriff Matthews was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, the same spot he'd occupied every morning for as long as Rebecca could remember. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in ages." Carol Matthews turned from the stove, spatula in hand, and studied her daughter's face. "You look different. More like yourself." Rebecca considered this. "I feel different. Stronger. Maybe." She poured herself orange juice and sat down across from her father. On the front page of the county newspaper was a headline that made her heart skip. "Local businessman charged in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme." It made the front page, above the fold. Mitchell wrote a good piece. Factual, not sensationalized. Rebecca read the article while her mother loaded her plate with pancakes she probably shouldn't eat but wanted anyway. The reporter had gotten the basic facts right. Jonathan's arrest, the bigamy charges, the investor fraud, Vanessa's cooperation with prosecutors. What the article couldn't capture was the human cost. The families who'd lost their savings. The employees who'd lost their jobs when Sterling Enterprises collapsed. The pregnant woman who'd lost her husband, her home, and her faith in love all in the same day. "Miranda called this morning," Sheriff Matthews said. "They found $12 million in offshore accounts. Recovery process will take time, but most of the investor money is still there." "What about our house?" "Sale's been canceled. Property's been returned to marital assets pending divorce proceedings. Rebecca thought about the glass and steel house that had never felt like home. I don't want it back. You don't have to decide that right now. Yes, I do. Rebecca pushed her pancakes around on her plate. That house represents everything that was wrong with my marriage. Jonathan's taste, Jonathan's money, Jonathan's vision of what our life should look like. I was just a prop in someone else's story. Her mother sat down at the table with her own coffee. So what do you want instead? Something smaller, something warm, something that belongs to me and this baby, not to Jonathan Sterling's carefully constructed image. It felt good to say it out loud, to claim agency over her own life for the first time in years. The insurance money from your gallery should give you a good start, Sheriff Matthews said. Rebecca looked up, confused. Insurance money? Someone broke into the gallery 3 nights ago, vandalized several paintings. Insurance is treating it as a total loss. Someone broke in. Who would do that? Sheriff Matthews and his wife exchanged a look. We think it was retaliation. Someone connected to Jonathan's business dealings who blamed you for his arrest? Rebecca felt cold suddenly. Are they going to come after me after the baby? Not anymore, they're not. Her father's voice had the edge it got when he was discussing threats to his family. We made some arrests yesterday. Turns out one of Jonathan's investors had connections to some unsavory people who didn't appreciate losing their money. Dad, you should have told me. You had enough to worry about. Besides, it's handled. Rebecca realized her parents had been protecting her from more than just emotional trauma. There had been real physical danger, and they dealt with it quietly, efficiently, without adding to her stress. The gallery's really gone. The building's fine, but most of the artwork was destroyed. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Rebecca was surprised to find she wasn't devastated by this news. The gallery had been her dream, but it had also been tied to Jonathan's money and Jonathan's connections. Maybe it was time for a different kind of dream. You know what, it's okay. I can start over, build something new. Her phone rang. Miranda Walsh's name appeared on the screen. Rebecca, I have news. Good news. I could use some good news. Jonathan's lawyer wants to make a deal. Full confession, cooperation with investigators, return of all remaining assets in exchange for a reduced sentence. How reduced? 5 to 7 years instead of 15 to 20. Rebecca walked to the kitchen window, looking out at her mother's garden. Tomatoes and peppers and herbs growing in neat rows. Life continuing. Seasons changing. Good things growing from careful tending. What do you think I should do? That's not my decision to make, but I will say this: a trial would be long, expensive, and emotionally exhausting. It would keep you tied to Jonathan for months, maybe years. And if he takes the deal, it's over. You can move on with your life. Rebecca thought about this, about the difference between justice and revenge, about what she wanted to model for her unborn child. I want him to pay back every penny he stole from those investors. That's part of the deal. Full restitution. And I want a public apology, admission of what he did to me specifically. Not just the financial crimes, but the personal betrayal. I can make that happen. Then yes, I'll accept the deal. After she hung up, Rebecca's parents were both looking at her. You sure about this? Sheriff Matthews asked. I'm sure. I don't need Jonathan Sterling to suffer for the rest of his life. I just need him to tell the truth and pay for what he's done. Then I want to forget he ever existed. That afternoon, Rebecca drove to the downtown courthouse to sign papers that would officially end her marriage. Not the fraudulent divorce Jonathan had filed, but a real dissolution based on fraud and abandonment. Sitting in the parking lot before going inside, she looked at herself in the rearview mirror. 9 months pregnant now. Any day, the baby would decide it was time to make their entrance into the world. She wanted to be ready, not just with a nursery and baby clothes and all the practical things, but emotionally ready. Ready to be a single mother, ready to build a life based on truth instead of lies. Ready to teach her child that sometimes love fails, but family doesn't. That sometimes people you trust will betray you, but that doesn't mean you stop trusting altogether. That justice matters, but so does forgiveness. And that starting over isn't failure, it's courage. Rebecca removed her wedding ring and dropped it into her purse. Then she walked into the courthouse to officially become Rebecca Matthews again. The woman she'd been before Jonathan Sterling. The woman she was ready to be after him. Rebecca Matthews went into labor at 3:17 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. She woke up to a contraction that felt different from all the practice ones, deeper, more insistent, with a rhythm that said, "Today is the day." "Dad," she called from her bedroom. "It's time." Sheriff Matthews appeared in her doorway so fast he must have been awake already, probably listening for exactly this moment. "You sure?" Another contraction answered for her. Rebecca gripped the bedpost and breathed through it, using techniques that suddenly felt very real and very necessary. "Let me get your mother. And the hospital bag. And the car keys. Dad, slow down. First babies take hours. We have time." But she was wrong. Rebecca Matthews Sterling, who was just Rebecca Matthews again, as of yesterday when the divorce was finalized, gave birth to her daughter at 7:43 that morning after 4.5 hours of labor that progressed much faster than anyone expected. The baby was perfect. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, 21 inches long, a full head of dark hair and eyes that looked exactly like Rebecca's. "She's beautiful," Dr. Harper said, placing the baby on Rebecca's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Rebecca looked down at her daughter and felt something shift inside her chest. A love so immediate and overwhelming it took her breath away. This tiny person had been growing inside her for 9 months, but seeing her face for the first time felt like meeting someone she'd known forever. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm your mama." The baby opened her eyes and seemed to look directly at Rebecca with an expression that was surprisingly alert for someone who just entered the world. "She knows you," Sheriff Matthews said softly. He was standing beside the hospital bed with tears in his eyes, meeting his granddaughter for the first time. "Of course she knows me. We've been together this whole time." Carol Matthews appeared with a pink blanket she'd been knitting for months. "What are you going to name her?" Rebecca had been thinking about this for weeks. Jonathan had wanted to name their child after his grandmother, if it was a girl. Something traditional and expensive sounding. But this baby wasn't Jonathan's daughter in any way that mattered. She was Rebecca's daughter, born into a new life free from lies and manipulation. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope Elizabeth Matthews." Hope Elizabeth. For the hope that had sustained Rebecca through the darkest months. For the new beginning this child represented. For the future they would build together. Hope Elizabeth Matthews, Sheriff Matthews repeated, testing out his granddaughter's name. "I like it. Strong name for a strong girl." The next few days passed in a blur of feeding schedules and diaper changes, and visitors bearing flowers and casseroles. The hospital room felt like a cocoon where Rebecca could focus entirely on learning to be a mother without worrying about anything else. Miranda Walsh stopped by with legal documents that officially closed the book on Rebecca's marriage to Jonathan Sterling. "All assets have been transferred back to you," she explained while Hope slept in Rebecca's arms. "The house, the joint accounts, your share of his business interests, plus a substantial settlement from the Investor Recovery Fund." "How substantial?" "Enough that you'll never have to worry about supporting Hope. Enough to buy a house, start a new business, send her to college." Jonathan's cooperation saved the state a lot of money in prosecution costs. They were generous with the victim compensation. Rebecca looked down at her sleeping daughter. Financial security wasn't something she dared to hope for, but here it was, the foundation for whatever life she chose to build. "There's something else," Miranda said. "Jonathan wants to see the baby." Rebecca's peaceful mood evaporated instantly. "Absolutely not. He's asking for visitation rights. He's still her biological father. He's a convicted felon who abandoned us before she was born. He has no rights to this child." Miranda nodded approvingly. "That's what I told his lawyer. But Rebecca, at some point Hope is going to ask about her father. You should think about what you want to tell her." After Miranda left, Rebecca held Hope closer and tried to imagine that conversation. How do you explain to a child that their father chose money over family, that he was willing to let them grow up believing they were unwanted? Sheriff Matthews knocked on the doorframe. "Mind if I come in?" "Of course, Dad." He sat in the chair beside her bed and studied his granddaughter's face. "She looks like you did when you were born. Same serious expression, like she's already trying to figure out how the world works. I hope she's smarter than I was. I hope she never lets anyone lie to her the way I let Jonathan lie to me. You were trusting. That's not the same thing as being stupid. Feels the same sometimes. Sheriff Matthews was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Rebecca, I want to tell you something. About the night you called me for help. What about it? When you said to bring my badge, I knew things were bad, but I didn't know how bad, and I was scared. This surprised her. Her father was never scared. At least, he never showed it. Scared of what? Scared I'd failed you somehow. That I'd raised a daughter who couldn't recognize when someone was taking advantage of her. Scared that my little girl was in trouble and I hadn't protected her. Rebecca felt tears starting. Dad, you didn't fail me. I know that now, because of what you did at that wedding. The way you stood up for yourself, demanded justice, refused to be a victim. That took more courage than anything I've ever done in 30 years of law enforcement. He reached over and touched Hope's tiny fist. This little girl is going to grow up knowing her mother is a fighter. That's the best gift you could give her. That evening, alone with Hope while her parents went home to rest, Rebecca sat by the hospital window watching the sunset over the river. In a few days, she would take her daughter home, not to the glass house that had never felt like sanctuary, but to somewhere new, somewhere that would be theirs. She had decisions to make: where to live, whether to restart her art gallery, how to build a life that would give Hope everything she needed while staying true to the woman Rebecca had discovered herself to be during the worst months of her life. But those decisions could wait. Right now, it was enough to hold her sleeping daughter and feel the quiet strength that came from surviving something that should have destroyed her. Hope stirred in her arms, making the small sounds newborns make when they're dreaming. Rebecca wondered what babies dream about: the warmth they've lost, the world they've gained. What are you dreaming about, sweetheart? She whispered. Hope's eyes opened, that same alert expression she'd worn since birth, as if she was listening to every word her mother said and filing it away for future reference. I want to tell you something, Rebecca said softly, about your daddy. This felt important, the first of many conversations they would have about Jonathan Sterling and his absence from their lives. Your daddy made some bad choices. He hurt people, including you and me. But that doesn't mean you're not wanted. It doesn't mean you're not loved. You are the most wanted, most loved little girl in the world. Hope yawned and settled back into sleep, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Rebecca continued anyway. You're going to have the best grandparents any child could ask for. And someday when you're ready, maybe you'll have a daddy who deserves you. But until then, it's going to be you and me. And that's going to be enough. Outside the window, the first stars were appearing in the October sky. Rebecca made a wish on the brightest one. Not for wealth or romance or any of the things she'd thought she wanted a year ago. She wished for wisdom, for the ability to raise her daughter with strength and compassion in equal measure, for the courage to keep her heart open even after it had been broken, for Hope to grow up knowing she was loved not because she was easy to love, but because love was a choice her mother made every single day. It was a big wish, but looking down at her sleeping daughter, Rebecca thought she might be strong enough to make it come true. 6 months after Hope was born, Rebecca Matthews stood in the main gallery of what would soon be Second Chances, a gallery for new beginnings. The space was smaller than her old gallery, but filled with more light. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced east, so the morning sun would illuminate whatever art hung on these walls. Hope gurgled happily from her carrier, watching her mother measure wall space and plan sight lines with the focused attention of someone who found the adult world endlessly fascinating. What do you think, sweetheart? Should we put the local artists section here by the windows? Hope responded with what sounded like agreement, though at 6 months old, most of her vocalization sounded like agreement to Rebecca's admittedly biased ears. The gallery was Rebecca's second chance at building something meaningful, but this time, it would be different. This time, she was funding it with money she'd earned herself the settlement from Jonathan's conviction. Money that represented justice rather than stolen dreams. More importantly, this gallery would serve a purpose beyond showcasing art. Half the space would be dedicated to local artists, as before, but the other half would be reserved for a program Rebecca had been developing for months: art therapy workshops for women rebuilding their lives after domestic violence, fraud, abandonment, or abuse. Women like her. The bell above the door chimed, Miranda Walsh entered carrying coffee and pastries from the bakery down the street. "How's it looking?" "Like home," Rebecca said, accepting the coffee gratefully. For the first time in years, something actually feels like home. Miranda looked around the empty space, probably seeing only bare walls and exposed floors. But Rebecca saw potential, healing, community. "Have you heard from him?" Miranda asked quietly. She didn't need to specify who he was. Jonathan Sterling had been eligible for parole after serving 18 months of his 5-year sentence. Good behavior and cooperation with ongoing fraud investigations had earned him early release. He sent a letter, wants to meet Hope. "How do you feel about that?" Rebecca considered the question while watching her daughter grab for dust motes dancing in a beam of sunlight. "I feel nothing," she said finally. "Not anger, not fear, not curiosity, nothing. And that feels like freedom." It was true, the man who had once been the center of her universe had become irrelevant to her life. Not through any deliberate effort to forget him, but through the simple process of building something better. Will you let him see her someday, when Hope is old enough to understand who he is and what he did, when she can make that choice for herself? But not now. Right now, she doesn't need the confusion of a father who chose his own interests over hers. The bell chimed again. Sheriff Matthews entered, carrying a toolbox and wearing work clothes instead of his uniform. "Ready to hang some art." He'd taken early retirement to help Rebecca launch the new gallery. Said he'd spent 30 years cleaning up other people's messes and wanted to spend the next 30 years helping people create something beautiful. Rebecca suspected he just wanted to be near his granddaughter as much as possible, but she wasn't complaining. Hope adored her grandfather, and the feeling was entirely mutual. "First piece goes right here." Rebecca pointed to the wall space she'd been measuring. "It's called Phoenix Rising." The painting was her own work, something she'd created during the long nights when Hope was a newborn and sleep seemed impossible. It showed a woman emerging from flames, not destroyed by them but transformed, stronger, more herself than she'd ever been. Sheriff Matthews studied the painting as he positioned it on the wall. "This is you, isn't it? It's all of us. Every woman who's had to start over. Every person who's discovered they're stronger than they thought. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I'm proud of me too." It felt good to say that. Rebecca Matthews at 31 was not the same person who had opened that wedding invitation 18 months ago. That woman had been dependent, trusting to a fault, willing to let someone else define her worth. This woman was independent, cautious but not cynical, and absolutely certain of her own value. They worked in comfortable silence, hanging paintings and adjusting lighting while Hope provided commentary from her carrier. By afternoon, the gallery was starting to look like itself. The front section showcased work by local artists, landscapes and abstracts and portraits that captured the beauty and complexity of their small town. The back section was set up for workshops and meetings, with comfortable seating and supplies for art therapy sessions. Between the two sections hung a sign Rebecca had commissioned from a local woodworker: "Art heals, community strengthens, truth liberates." At 5 o'clock, Rebecca's mother arrived with dinner for the work crew and eager arms for her granddaughter. "How was Hope today?" "Perfect, as always. She's got your father's patience and your determination. Dangerous combination." Carol Matthews settled into a chair with Hope, who immediately began showing off her newest skill blowing raspberries that made her grandmother laugh. "Rebecca, there's something your father and I want to discuss with you." Rebecca looked up from the inventory list she was checking. Her parents had that expression they got when they were planning something they thought she might object to. "What kind of something?" "The house," Sheriff Matthews said. "Jonathan's house that you inherited. We know you don't want to live there, but we had an idea." "I'm listening." "What if we turned it into transitional housing for women leaving bad situations who need a safe place to stay while they get back on their feet?" Rebecca set down her clipboard and really looked at her parents. At these two people who had raised her to believe in justice and service and using whatever privilege you had to help others. "That's brilliant. It's perfect." "You think so?" "I think it's exactly what that house should become. Instead of being a monument to one man's greed, it becomes a sanctuary for people who need safety." They spent the rest of the evening planning. The house could easily be converted into apartments for 3 or 4 families. The property was large enough for gardens and play areas. There was even space for workshops and meetings. "We could partner with the gallery," Rebecca said. excitement building. Art therapy on site, exhibitions of work created by residents, job training in creative fields. The Rebecca Matthews Foundation, Miranda suggested. Tax advantages would be significant, and it would give you a platform for advocacy work. Rebecca looked around at the people who had supported her through the darkest period of her life. Her parents, who had never doubted she could rebuild. Her friend, who had fought for justice on her behalf. Her daughter, who had given her a reason to believe in the future. Not the Rebecca Matthews Foundation, she said, the Hope Foundation, named after what got us through. Hope, as if responding to her name, clapped her hands and babbled something that sounded remarkably like approval. That night, after her parents had gone home and the gallery was locked up for the evening, Rebecca sat in her small apartment above the space, nursing hope before bedtime. This was her life now. Simple, authentic, purposeful, so different from the complicated performance that had been her marriage to Jonathan Sterling. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. For a moment, her old anxiety flickered. Then she read the message. Saw the article about your new gallery in the paper? I was one of Jonathan's victims too. Would love to talk about joining your program. Sarah. Rebecca smiled and typed back quickly. Call me tomorrow. We're stronger together. She was right about that. They were stronger together. All of them. The women who had been betrayed and abandoned and defrauded. The families who had lost savings to con artists. The children who would grow up knowing their parents had chosen justice over silence. Rebecca looked down at Hope, who was falling asleep with the satisfied expression of a baby who knew she was safe and loved and wanted. You know what I learned. Sweetheart, I learned that getting everything you thought you wanted isn't nearly as good as discovering you're strong enough to build something better. Hope's eyes fluttered closed. Her tiny fist remained wrapped around Rebecca's finger, as if even in sleep she wanted to maintain that connection. Outside, the town was settling into evening quiet. Soon, this gallery would be full of art and artists and women learning that they too could start over, that they too could transform pain into purpose. Rebecca Matthews had been stripped of everything she thought defined her. Her marriage, her financial security, her trust in love, her faith in other people's honesty. But in losing everything, she had found herself, and that, she was learning, was worth more than everything she had lost combined. Tomorrow, the Second Chances Gallery would officially open. Tomorrow, the Hope Foundation would begin its work of turning Jonathan Sterling's House of Lies into a place of healing. Tomorrow, Rebecca would take another step forward in the life she was building, not as someone's wife or victim, but as herself. Tonight, though, it was enough to hold her sleeping daughter and feel the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had faced the worst thing she could imagine and discovered she was strong enough not just to survive it, but to transform it into something meaningful. The wedding invitation that had shattered her world 18 months ago was pressed between the pages of Hope's baby book now, not as a monument to pain, but as a reminder of how far they had come, from that moment of devastating discovery to this moment of quiet triumph, from victim to survivor to someone who helped other survivors find their own strength, from the woman who had signed papers without reading them to the woman who owned her own gallery and ran her own foundation and raised her daughter to know that truth matters more than comfort. Rebecca Matthews smiled and carried her sleeping daughter to the nursery she had painted herself, in the apartment she had chosen herself, above the gallery that belonged entirely to her. Outside, Sheriff Thomas Matthews sat in his patrol car in the parking lot, making his final rounds before retirement, keeping watch over his daughter and granddaughter the way he had been keeping watch over his community for 30 years. Some things, he had learned, were worth protecting. Some people were strong enough to protect themselves. And sometimes the best thing a father could do was stand guard while his daughter discovered just how powerful she really was. The stars above the Second Chances Gallery shone brightly in the October sky, witnessing the end of one story and the beginning of another. A story about hope, and the woman strong enough to choose it, even when choosing it seemed impossible. Rebecca's story reminds us that sometimes our greatest betrayals become our greatest transformations, that sometimes losing everything we thought we wanted helps us discover everything we actually need. But Rebecca's story doesn't end here. It continues every day in women just like her, finding the courage to rebuild, to trust again, to believe they deserve better. If this story touched your heart, if Rebecca's strength inspired your own journey. If you believe other women need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles, then please hit that like button right now. Your support means everything to creators who share these stories of hope and healing. And here's something special: drop a comment below and tell us what moment in Rebecca's story resonated most with you. Was it when she found those divorce papers? When she walked into that church 8 months pregnant? When she chose justice over revenge? Or when she held baby Hope for the first time? We read every single comment, and your words inspire the stories we tell next. If you know someone who needs to hear Rebecca's message of strength and renewal, please share this video with them. Sometimes a story that changes someone's life is just one share away from reaching them. And if you're ready for more stories about women who refuse to stay silent, who turned their pain into power, who discovered they were stronger than they ever imagined, then subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell, because we're just getting started. Remember, your story isn't over just because someone else tried to write the ending. Sometimes the best chapters come after everything falls apart. Until next time, keep believing in your own strength. You're more powerful than you know.